Colossians chapter 2. We'll pick up in verse 14. What we've noticed in the context of the church at Colossae had been troubled, were being troubled by false teachers, people having different ideas, concepts, injecting their thinking and doctrines into the mix. And so much of the New Testament is written to all these congregations, pointing out what's true, correcting the errors that are being taught. One of the major areas was the idea, what we often refer to as Judaizing teachers, those who had been Jews all of their life through the law of Moses and synagogue worship and such, had now learned the gospel and obeyed it, but they still wanted to go back and keep parts of the old law, namely circumcision from the males, the men, and bringing that over, saying that if you're a Gentile and you're converted, you cannot be a real Christian, a true Christian, unless you've been circumcised. And that was troubling to all the churches. There's an element of it even existing today in those who are many times designated as Sabbatarians. Sabbatarian just means Sabbath. Sabbath is seventh day of the week. There are those who identify themselves as Christians, but they worship God on Saturday instead of Sunday. They worship on the last day of the week, the seventh day, instead of the first day of the week. And we're going to talk about some of those points here in a moment. But what we're looking at then, beginning in verse 14 of Colossians chapter 2, there's a reference to the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments, the two tables of stone, all the law, the ordinances, the statutes, the precepts, everything in connection to it, according to verse 14, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances which was against us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. In essence, he's talking about the fact that when the Lord went to the cross, not only did he do so in order to shed his blood for our redemption, that people, humanity, might be saved. And really his blood that was shed then went backwards in time all the way to Adam and Eve. All throughout the system of patriarchy and the law of Moses, Judaism through the centuries, there was never any real actual forgiveness of sins, but only in prospect, in the sense that the Christ would one day come and offer himself, his pure blood as a sacrifice, when their sins would be forgiven. That was done in prospect. But there were sacrifices, animal sacrifices, blood sacrifices through the centuries. There was a remembering of sins every year. And now, when the Lord went to the cross, he shed his blood to give the actual and real forgiveness, going all the way back to the beginning and going all the way future until this world stands no more. His blood redeems sins of all humanity. But now, in addition to that, he gives instruction here that the Old Testament law, which was given to the Israelites, we call it the Ten Commandments, the law of Moses, is now fulfilled its purpose and is taken away, done away, made null and void. And he speaks of it here, verse 14, as blotting it out. We mentioned last week when you blot something you're writing and you make a mistake and you can't erase it, you just kind of you just blot it out where you can't see it. You don't know what's under it anymore. And that's what he says has happened to the Ten Commandments. Now again, there are those who say, no, that wasn't the Ten Commandments. That was laws concerning rituals and ordinances and ceremony. And the real law, he said, they would tell us, the Ten Commandment law, they would call it a moral law, that God did not put away the moral law, the Ten Commandments, But he put away all the other little ordinances and things that were coming along. But notice again, we look in verse 14. Blotting out the handwriting of ordinances. You remember in the time that Moses ascended Mount Sinai, the children of Israel had left the bondage in Egypt. They'd crossed the Red Sea. And in that, on dry land, they got on the other side. The Egyptians sought to come after them. And, of course, God closed the sea back up, drowned them all. So now they're free, no longer fearful of the Egyptians running after them. So they come down to the southern part of Sinai, and Moses receives the Ten Commandment law. And that law, as we know, was written on 2 tables of stones. And the Bible refers to that as that was written with the finger of God. Now, we use our fingers, don't we, when we hold a writing instrument and we write. God carved out on stone 10 commandments representative of the entirety of the law, and he did so with his own finger. Now that, he says, was the handwriting of ordinances. It was against us. It was contrary to us. It was contrary in the sense that it did not provide for real and actual forgiveness. But it was preparing people, those who were involved in it. They were learning the lesson that without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. You read, as we read over in the book of Hebrews, there had to be blood. But we also learn from Hebrews that the blood of animals, goats and calves and bullocks and such, is not sufficient to take away. Now, there's nothing any more, I would say, important or magnificent in the sense that it was blood. It wasn't like cutting off something or doing away with something that had no consequence. We get a haircut, that's no consequence. I mean, there's no penalty to pay. It doesn't hurt to do that. But blood wasn't just taking blood. We give blood today. May go in and give a pint of blood, but we walk out afterwards, sometimes feeling nothing at all, sometimes a bit, tired as a result. But no problem. But to shed blood, that meant death. To shed blood was death. Now that is serious. When the Lord went to the cross, he just didn't give a pint of blood. He gave it all of his blood, as it were. No, so there's no more life. The Bible tells us in the Old Testament book of Leviticus that the life is in the blood. And when our blood supply in our body gets so low it cannot sustain our life, we die. Well, the Lord gave his blood. And that's serious. That is life. He gave his life for us. So, but yet that old law was contrary to us. It could not provide for the forgiveness of sins. Now, it was full, it was complete, it was perfect in the purpose and for the purpose for which God gave it. But it never had the purpose of actually forgiving sin. That makes sense. Some people say, well, it was inferior. There was something short about it. Well, it wasn't inferior in respect to what its purpose was. Its purpose was to remind the people how serious sin is. It was to magnify sin. Sin is such a huge problem, there's only one thing that could rectify that problem, and that's death, the giving of blood. And yet the blood of bulls and goats couldn't do that, but the blood of the sinless, perfect Son of God could. And so it was contrary to us in the sense that it condemned us. We read also in the scriptures in 1 John chapter 3, verse 4, that sin is the transgression, the violation of the law of God. And in Romans 3:23, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Therefore, anyone that sins, you're done for. That's it. There is no chance apart from the sinless blood of Christ. Take all the animals through the century, and you could even do human sacrifices of blood. That was never allowed for, but it wouldn't matter. The only thing that would forgive sins was the sinless Son of God, the blood that he shed. The law, it just magnified it. It just showed you can't help it. You're going to sin either out of ignorance or willingly or anything in between. When you sin, you're done for. You're separated from God. You die separated from God, you go to hell. That's all the law. It was cold. It was heartless. It just go bang. It just hit you blunt force. But there's another law, the law of Christ. It was compassionate. It was full of mercy. It involved forgiveness. So there's the contrast between the Old Testament Ten Commandment law and all the ordinances and precepts and statutes that went along with it, and the New Testament law. This law condemned. The Old Testament condemned. That's what was contrary to us. But the new law, in that we can have forgiveness. So because it was inadequate to forgive sins, and because it was against us, it was contrary to us, it was taken away. It was taken out of the way. It was removed. Well, how did that take place? In God's purpose, the last phrase of verse 14, it was done by nailing it to his cross. Well, that wasn't a literal nailing. He didn't take a copy of the Ten Commandments to the cross, but it was a spiritual significance. By his death on the cross, the Old Testament law, the Ten Commandment law, was made null, made void. It was taken away. It was canceled. Now, here's another interesting fact about it. The old law, even when it was given, it was written that it would pass away. It was only for a limited amount of time. It was only temporary. It was never intended to last forever. But it was given in order to help the people recognize, to tide them over, we might say, the Israelites particularly, because they ended up being God's chosen people. When the Ten Commandments were given, Abraham didn't know anything about it. He didn't know anything about Sabbath keeping. Now, the fourth of those Ten Commandments is about keeping the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Abraham didn't know that. He's the father of us all, the Bible says. He was the father, the ancestor of the Israelites physically. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob, his grandson, had 12 sons who became the heads of the 12 tribes. Constituting Israel. They didn't know anything about Sabbath keeping. Now I want to look at a number of passages for sake of our own, but also for the recording and the broadcast that we're doing here to be archived, that these scriptures will be able to be shown there for all future time. If you will, turn your Bible to Deuteronomy chapter 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5. And we learn here of the giving of the Ten Commandment law. Deuteronomy chapter 5. We read where Israel later were referred back to the day that Moses had ascended upon the mountain of Sinai and where it was given the Ten Commandment law. And Moses called all Israel and said unto them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and judgments which I speak in your ears this day, that ye may learn them and keep them and do them. Verse 2, the Lord our God made a covenant with us. Now there's emphasis on the us. This is Moses, who was an Israelite, speaking to the entire Israelite population in camp. The Lord made a covenant with us. Where was this covenant made? Verse 2, in Horeb. Horeb. Horeb was Mount Horeb. It also had another name, often referred to as Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, same mountain, just two different designations. Then verse 3. The Lord, Deuteronomy 5, verse 3, the Lord made not this covenant. We would say it, the Lord did not make this covenant. But it's worded a little bit different here. The Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, our ancestors. That's what I was talking about, our ancestors. But with us. Who's the us? Even us, who are all of us here alive this day. As if I'm standing before you and those in the audience here, I mentioned what I'm about to say and what I'm giving you is for us, not anybody else. If you're not here, it doesn't apply to you. You have to be present. You know, sometimes where there's giveaways in stores or whatever, and a lot of times you say you have to be present to win. Well, that's the same concept here. Here's Moses talking to all the children of Israel. The Lord made this covenant with us. Now, not our fathers, not our ancestors. That means Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They weren't amenable to the Ten Commandment law. They had a law. They were not without law, but it wasn't the Ten Commandment law. Not the law that was written on tables of stone. It was something new that was being given on this occasion. So we made it with us, not our fathers, but only those of us who are here alive. That means they couldn't be dead in part of the law. You have to be alive, you have to be present, and that's where it was made. Then notice another look while you're in Deuteronomy. Look back a little further into the book of Exodus. Go back to your left, you all know that. Go back to your left in the Bible into Exodus chapter 31. Exodus 31. Exodus 31 in verse 16, where we'll begin to read. We'll read through verse 18. Exodus 31, verse 16. Wherefore, the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath. Now, the fourth of the Ten Commandments was the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath. Who else in the world? The children of Israel. Well, wasn't there other people? No, it was the children of Israel. The children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generation, not through the world's generations. The Israelites through their generations, for a perpetual covenant, that is an ongoing covenant. It would last as long as the Israelites were recognized as the people of God through their fleshly lineage, their fleshly birth. But see, when Jesus died on the cross, that took the Jews out of the picture. They were no longer, the Israelites were no longer God's special chosen people. Now, the world today, so many people still think, oh, we got to be with Israel today over there in Palestine. And right now, they're on the brink of war. They're already involved in war, but all this stuff, we got to be with Israel because that's God's people. They're not God's people. They haven't been God's people since the day the Lord died on the cross. He took that law out of the way. They were no longer his. Now, they have the possibility, and some of them have obeyed the gospel. It's those who obey the gospel. Those are the Lord's people today. Those are God's people. We are one of God's people because we choose to obey the gospel. Now, those who were Jews, when they learned the truth and obeyed the gospel, they're part of God's people. Today, it's a spiritual kingdom as God's people. In the Old Testament, it was physical, material, descendants of Abraham, but namely those at Mount Sinai. Anybody the day before, it didn't apply to them. On the day that the law was given on Mount Sinai, and all the Israelites, and only the Israelites. But that lasted only until the Lord came and died on the cross. But now let's go back to Exodus 31. Look at verse 17. It is a sign. The giving of the law, the Ten Commandments, was a sign between me is God here, and the children of Israel. Not the world, not the Gentiles. It was a sign. What was the sign? To honor the Sabbath day. That's the context. verse 16, the verse right before, Exodus 31:16. Keeping the Sabbath was a sign. It was something special between God and the children of Israel. Now, if it had always been special, if Adam and Eve knew about the Sabbath day and they were to keep it, and all the world was to keep it, how could it be a sign between God and Israel? That'd be nothing special. They already had it. That's the whole point. They didn't have it until the Ten Commandments was given on Mount Sinai. So it was a sign between God and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. And notice verse 18. And he gave unto Moses. Didn't give it to Adam and Eve. Didn't give it to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Didn't give it to Noah or any of the others in ancient history. He gave it to Moses. Well, when was that? When he had made an end of communing with him upon the mount. When Moses went up to the Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, God communed, spoke to him. That's when it happened. That's when it was given. And what was that? Unless there was any question about it. Notice, 2 tables of testimony. Tables of stone. And it was written with the finger of God. You ever wonder why the Bible, in so many places, the Old Testament and New Testament, why it repeats the same thing over and over again? It may, just like we do sometimes, we'll say something, and then we'll say it again, but we're using a different word to just help explain, help confirm in our minds. And so the Old Testament does that. And the point is, so there won't be any misunderstanding. Everybody will know what we're talking about. So he talks about here, the communing with him on Mount Sinai, going back to verse 18 of Exodus 31. Well, what was that? That it was the 2 tables of stones. Well, give me more information about that. It was the tables of testimony. What more do we know? It was written with the finger of God. Why do you keep repeating those points? It makes it so clear. It can't be anything else other than the 10 Commandments written by the finger of God on 2 tables of stone given on Mount Sinai. Now, that's simple to us. It's kind of repetitive to us. And we think, well, but the rest of the world, they need this extra information because they fail to get the point. Well, what became of those 10 Commandment laws? Then look over in 1 Kings chapter 18. Or no, chapter 8, rather. 1 Kings chapter 8. And we read about it again. Now, from what we're looking at in Exodus and Deuteronomy, in 1 Kings, we're looking about a time frame of close to 1,000 years. Maybe not hardly that much, but many hundreds of years. 1 Kings 8 and verse 9. And there was nothing in the ark save the 2 tables of stone. Well, what 2 tables of stone are we talking about? He's going to tell you, which Moses put there at Horeb. Moses received the law, come down from the mount. They had a tabernacle. He placed the 2 tables of stone in the tabernacle. When the Lord made a covenant with the children of Israel. There it is again. He didn't make it with Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham. No, he made it with the children of Israel. So when God made the covenant with the children of Israel, when they came out of the land of Egypt. See how clear that is? But people still refuse to see it. Oh, no, the Sabbath has always been there. Well, then let me give you another passage. Look at Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah, chapter 9. Nehemiah 9 in verse 12, beginning. We'll read through verse 15. Nehemiah 9, verse 12 through 15. And again, I'm going through these because it nails down, so there can be no question about it, as to what is going on and what's being spoken. In Nehemiah chapter 9 and verse 12. Moreover, thou leddest them in the day by a cloudy pillar. When did God do that? We look at the entire context of Nehemiah 9. He's talking about when the children of Israel was wandering through the wilderness, coming down to Sinai. God led them in the daytime by a cloudy pillar, and in the night by a pillar of fire, to give them light in the way wherein they should go. Verse 13, Nehemiah 9. Thou camest down also upon Mount Sinai, and spakest with them from heaven. And now notice what happened when God spoke to them. And gavest them right judgments, and true laws, good statutes, and commandments. Not only 10 commandments, but all the other little things that were added along the way, some specifics, broadening upon the scope of the 10 commandments. So God gave them right judgments, good true laws, good statutes, and commandments. Then notice what else God did at Mount Sinai, Nehemiah 9, verse 14. Now this nails it down. And made us known unto them my holy Sabbath. The world did not know anything about Sabbath keeping until it was revealed to the children of Israel in the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. God made known to them. They had no clue, nor did anybody else in the world. Now, that nails it down, doesn't it? It was when God made known unto them his holy Sabbath, and commanded them precepts, statutes, and laws by the hands of Moses thy servant, verse 15, and gave us them bread from heaven for their hunger, and brought us forth water for them out of the rock for their thirst, and promised them that they should go in to possess the land which thou hast sworn to give them. So it was only the children of Israel that received the 10 Commandment law. I dare say you go out this afternoon or throughout this week or at any time, ask any of your friends, working associates, ask just about anybody, do you think we ought to be living under the 10 Commandments today? If you ask that question, almost without exception of anybody that knows much of anything about the Bible, they're going to, typically, here's what they'll say. And I've asked it 1,000 times, and this is the number one answer. Do you believe we should be living under the 10 Commandments today? Most everybody's going to say, we're not doing so, but we need to. We ought to. They recognize, no, we're not really keeping the 10 Commandments, but we're supposed to. That's probably the number one answer. It's because, but they don't know. They don't know these passages that we just now covered. The Bible answer to the question, do you believe people today ought to be, should be, or amenable to living under the 10 Commandment law? The Bible answer to that is no. It was taken away, nailed to the cross, and we're no longer under it. That's the Bible answer. But yet people today still will say, oh no, we're not living under it, but we ought to be. We should be. We shouldn't be. It wasn't given to us. Even if it had never been taken away, it still wouldn't be for us. We're Gentiles. This was for only the children of Israel and those who were born fleshly children of the children of Israel throughout their generations. And yet the world does not understand that. So, going back to Colossians 2, verse 14, it was contrary, it was against us, it was contrary to us, and he took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. So one of the things that would be obvious to ask this, well, what happened to it? Why was it taken away? What happened to it? Let me run through some of these passages, and we began to look at some of these last week, and we ran out of time and didn't get to. If you would look in Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 13. Hebrews 8 and verse 13. Here we learn I won't read the entire verse, but the basic point of it is that the 10 Commandment law was old, it was decayed, and it vanished. Three things. It was old, decayed, and it vanished. Then look at, go back to chapter 7 of Hebrews. Hebrews 7 verse 12. We read that it was changed. There was a changing of the priesthood The Old Testament law, the Ten Commandments, Judaism only provided for the descendants of Levi, of the house of Aaron, that could be priests. The rest of the people couldn't. But that was changed because Christ today is our great high priest. But Hebrews 7:12, you read it in those verses around it, saying Christ couldn't be priest. He was from the tribe of Judah. He wasn't from the tribe of Levi. So since he is the priest, and the Bible says that he is, there's only one alternative that could be possibly true. The law was changed. That's the point. It was changed. The law would not allow someone from the tribe of Judah to be a priest. But Christ is a priest. How do we deal with it? The Bible says the law was changed. It was changed. So Christ is our new high priest. Then while you're there in Hebrews 7, look at verse 18. We read some other things about the law. It was disannulled. To disannul means to cancel or to put it away because it was weak. Why was the law weak? Well, it was weak in the sense that it did not provide for the forgiveness of sins. I mean, it was great for what God intended it to do, and it accomplished what God wanted done. But it never intended to put away sins. So it was weak, and it was unprofitable. Then look at Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 1. Hebrews 10 verse 1. Here the Bible says the law was a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of the things. So you have an object or an image and the shadow that it casts. The law was a shadow. It wasn't the real thing. It was only temporary. It was a shadow. Now, isn't shadows temporary? The sun comes out and it moves through the day. Actually, the shadow moves, and before long it's gone. Or under artificial light, we have a shadow. My hand is casting a shadow here. And we know what a shadow is. There's nothing you can do with a shadow. You can't touch it. You can't grab it. The law was a shadow. It was a very dim something that pointing to what the real thing was, the very image that was to come. Now, as we learn, go back here to Colossians 2, verse 14, it was nailed to the cross. It was nailed to the cross. Then look back at Galatians chapter 3 and verse 24. If someone were to ask, well, why was the law given? Well, the Bible answer again, in a nutshell, is to magnify sin, to show to mankind he cannot save himself. That was the point. Man cannot save himself. Nobody could. But notice Galatians 3, verse 14. Wherefore the law, the Ten Commandments, the entirety of the Old Testament, of all its precepts and such, the law was our schoolmaster. Schoolmaster. In our time today, we might think a schoolmaster, well, that's got to be the principal. But in the Bible's case, no, that's not the case. The schoolmaster is not the principal. In this case, the schoolmaster, he's pointing out, was to bring us to Christ. Verse 24. The schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. The schoolmaster would be more like a bus driver, school bus driver. The bus driver goes by the house, picks up the children, takes them safely to the school where they will be learning and educated. And once his job is done, when he has dropped them off and he sees them go in the building, the bus driver's job is done. He can leave until next time. That was what the Old Testament was. It was only there to escort the children of Israel, nobody else in the world, just the children of Israel, and bring them to Christ. But then when Christ has come, then the law served no purpose anymore. So Galatians 3:24, wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. The old law didn't, though faith was involved, the main emphasis in the old law was law 1, law 2, law 3, law 4. It was cold and rigid, and nobody could keep it perfectly. But under the system of the New Testament, there's still law. And we strive to keep it and do the best we can under the laws of God, but we're not perfect, and we fail in the process. And that's where faith comes in. It's not that works go up to this point, then works stop, and faith begins. That's not the way the Bible describes it. Faith and works are hand in hand. Faith and works all along. In the Old Testament, the works was the point of emphasis, coupled with their faith. But in the New Testament, faith is the point of emphasis, but still coupled with works. The vision or the view of it changes. So now in the New Testament, we're justified by faith. Look at verse 25. Galatians 3, verse 25. But after that faith has come, then get over this. Get around this. You can't do it. We are no longer under a schoolmaster. Verse 24 says the Old Testament law was a schoolmaster that would bring us to Christ. But then when Christ has come, we're no longer under the Old Testament law. The Old Testament law included the 10 Commandments, one of which was remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And we're no longer under that law. That was only special, it was only limited, it was only for the children of Israel. And they needed to know more of what God had to say. So, we're no longer under a schoolmaster. Well, if that is the case, why was the law given? Verse 19, I'll cover this real quickly. Wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions. For how long? Till the seed should come to whom the promise was made. Who was that? That was Christ. It was Christ. It was only till Christ should come. Look at verse 16, then we'll close. Galatians 3:16. Now Abraham and his seed were the promises made. And he saith not unto seeds, plural, as a many, but as the one seed, singular, which is Christ. That ties it all together. People, though, still trip and fall and stumble over that and do not see it. Anyway, we'll pick up here likewise. We'll do verse 15 for next week.